Well, welcome back to Sovereign Independent Radio. We're talking to Alan Watts of CuttingThroughTheMatrix.com, and I would encourage all listeners to go there, listen to Alan's broadcast. He does 5 days a week. For listeners in the UK, you can download it the morning after, and he puts all the links up there for his information to prove the facts he's talking about, and backs it up with references to numerous books, old, new, historical, all the rest of it. And I think you'll find it very informative and at times quite frightening. I think Alan will agree. We were talking during the break there about the control of the food supply and the fact that, Alan mentioned before, the United Nations have decided that they're going to be the masters of starvation, if you like, and basically ration out food based on population, and the governments will just have to cut the populations by any means which happen to be at their disposal at the time. So we were talking during the break about the farmers and the fact that particularly recently in Australia, the carbon tax has basically wiped out many farmers who basically aren't allowed to farm their own land anymore. For numerous reasons, some of it's been due to areas of special scientific interest or conservation or any other dubious scheme or plan or diktat that comes out of the United Nations. And it should be obvious to anybody, especially those in the farming community, when they start hearing about coming food shortages, they should start looking at themselves, because they've been bribed for well over 40 years now by the European Union not to grow any food. When I was staying in Ireland, I was surrounded by farmers, and I was the only one growing anything. All the fields around me were empty. There was maybe a few sheep, a few cattle, but nobody was growing any crops whatsoever. And I've moved down to England now. There's more of it being grown down here, particularly wheat and potatoes and things like that, the kind of staple foods. But in Scotland, there's virtually nothing being grown in vast areas of the countries. And I was actually at a meeting which was supposedly to try and bring about some kind of political change when I was living in Ireland. And many of the people there were farmers. And I asked a simple question. I said, what are you guys going to do what are you prepared to sacrifice to get things going and to start, growing food again and all the rest of it? And they basically turned around and said, oh, well, we can't afford it. So I basically walked out at that stage, because there wasn't any point talking to them, because they weren't prepared to give up their EU bribe. Is it the same thing going on in Canada, Alan? Are they being paid not to grow food there?
They have, yeah. They have for many years, in fact, too. The government uses wars to change everything. Again, Quigley talked about that. He said that one of the main side effects, and actually one of the main effects which they want from major wars, is that it changes the cultures of both sides, because government steps in and nationalizes so much. They get into everything. And they got into farming since World War II, and Britain especially, and they never let go with all of the different ministries and inspections and all the rest of it. But yeah, they started giving farmers the little bait. It's just like the credit cards from the banks. They call them the bait, the mouse baits. And same with farmers. We can help you out with your taxes. You'll pay less tax if you do this. Once you start letting them dictate to you, then they come along and say, we'd rather you not grow so much stuff this year, because there's going to be an abundance in corn or wheat or whatever. And now that we're putting all our food together in the EU, it's going to make it too cheap. And the big companies won't profit so much. And that's why you had all the butter mountains and so on. They were dumping food in the channel and so on to keep the prices up. So basically government is completely in bed. And this is what we've got to understand. Government is not your government. It hasn't been your whole life long. The government you have are really the men that, especially the Royal Institute of International Affairs, these are the men they put in. And Quigley said the same thing. There hasn't been a prime minister or a president elected by the people, who serves the people since the late 1800s. And it doesn't matter about the rest of them. They're allowed to vie for power amongst themselves, that the minor ones are coming up. But the guys on top are always members of the same organization. And now we have the EU with its European Council on Foreign Relations, and George Soros is at the top of that. Now, Soros pretends he's out to help the world, like they all do. Whenever they say this, I tell people to run in the opposite directions. But Soros, again, was involved in the wars in Europe and Kosovo and Yugoslavia. He was involved with Madeleine Albright and the guys from the World Bank and the IMF that already had it planned which companies they were going to steal from that country and have it under their own corporations. They're all involved in this together. And so every side that seems to be out there opposing each other in the high levels is not. They're all working on the same agenda. And the rest of it is just to confuse us, basically. So food is a weapon. Never forget that. Food is a weapon. Anything which is a weapon is weaponized. Your food also is weaponized. And that was the whole thing to do with giving you the Monsanto seed and the Rothschilds group as well. They've got their own version as well. There's a whole bunch of them out there. That you have to go back every year to the master, basically. You're back in serfdom, to the master for the seeds. And rather than just collect your own seed, they've weaponized the food. They've poisoned the food. And I really mean that, literally. They have poisoned the food. The guys from Monsanto are a big part of the military-industrial complex. They were involved not just in Agent Orange, but in many other forms of killing whole populations. And when I see scientists coming together to improve your potato, I get a bit nervous. The same scientists. And now they dose it with their own pesticides that gets into selling the plants. You're eating that stuff. And you wonder why the cancer rate is going sky high. This is all predicted by them before they started. They knew what they were going to do. So you've got to get back to natural farming if you can, but that means that the farmer's got to have the right to tear up every demand made by government that's been put upon him, so he can start being a farmer on his own land and growing what he wants once again and doing it the way he wants once again. But once they take the bait from government, we'll help you, we'll give you tax relief, or we'll give you little grants. No, I'm sorry, you're sold out, you've lost the farm. You've lost the farm.
Yeah, I think, I spoke to quite a few farmers in Ireland, and they were all of the same mind. Oh, we love the land, we've always done this. This is our life, And I would say to them, but you're not farming anymore. You're filling in paperwork. You're not growing anything. I said, what are your children going to do? What are your sons going to do? Are they farmers? Oh, no. They're working on the building sites, or they're doing computers or something else. So there's no lineage of farming tradition being passed on either. So obviously there aren't going to be farmers in the future anyway.
That's right. See, all that stuff that's second nature to the farmer, he's grown up doing it. It's stuff you could cram into whole volumes, like an encyclopedia set. He's taken up for granted because he grew up on the farm. All you need is to break it for one generation and it's gone. You've lost your power to even feed yourself. Something as primal as feeding yourself you have lost. So who's in charge of it now? The big boys who've now got, not have they only got you under their money system, now they've got you under their food rationing system and what kind of food you're going to eat and where from and all the rest of it. This is weaponized. This is part of warfare. Same with the water supply. When you see them going after your food and your water, the most basic things, you're in a war. And you better realize that this is what this is about. This is a war. Because these are the things that kill you off or get you to your knees. You can't allow them to do this.
Yep. They've gone after the air as well, of course. But,
if I'm allowed just to
go on, Brian.
Slip a thing in. Again, I agree with everything that's being discussed about the plan that's underway and control of the food and poisoning of the water. If you come back to your farmers, I'm going to say, well, it's a rhetorical question, but they didn't. I don't think that they met in a pub one day and decided not to grow food. What actually happened was that officials appeared on the scene with paperwork and brochures and attractive offers that if they let so many acres I refuse to use hectare. So many acres were left fallow, then they could start to draw on the European money. So these very big, powerful families, in order to try and take control of the food supply, had to use what I will call the command and control system, which came down through national government, and then it came into the agencies, DEFRA, or whatever its equivalent is in Ireland. And from there, the directives on what should and shouldn't happen and what could and couldn't happen with food production. Then that came in through even local council level until basically the information was brought to the farmers. And then they started to realise, well, we don't have to work so hard because we can just suck off the European money. But the only way that these immensely powerful families could get their plan to interfere with food production working was to actually use people through a whole chain of command within the public sector. And I'm going to say that if I look at a way of destabilising what's happening, we simply, and I use that word deliberately, we simply have to break that command and control structure, so that the nonsense and the politics and the directives and the red tape and the legislation, which is all being rained upon farmers, the subject in this case, that we actually break that. We give them an umbrella. Now, when can we do that? Or when can we do this? I think we can do it. We can do it now. Neil was trying to do it some time ago. But the reason it wasn't working was because the farmers weren't hungry enough. And I think that if we're going to do something about what's happening, timing is very, very important, because as we've all learned, if we try and pass the message and get the exposure happening too early, people are too warm, comfortable, well-fed and enjoying their foreign holidays to want to listen. So we need people to become a bit hungrier than they are, and we need them to become a bit more disturbed than they are in order to be fertile ground for our message. But that is approaching very, very quickly. And then the timing issue says that we have to be very, very clever at choosing the moment at which we interfere with these control structures. The moment enough local people refuse to pay their taxes, they are in control of the local authority. The moment enough farmers simply say, no, we're not following the DEFRA guidelines, they are in control. So the control can switch sides very, very quickly, but we have to choose our moment.
You're right, timing, and I think Alan alluded to organisation earlier as well. I think if you're going to, challenge the farmers to kind of stand up and start, doing what their job is basically, and take a bit of responsibility for feeding the public, which that is their tradition through their families and generations.
Yeah, it's a system. It's the very system that got us through the so-called Great Depression. We're in a worse one now, actually, coming up, at least on paper. But there were farms all over the place at one time, and locals could go down to the farms and trade something off and get some food or eggs or whatever. And I'm sure you've got it in Britain, where if you rear your own chickens anymore, now the government inspector comes in to see if you can sell them to the public. And they're closing down all these places across Canada right now, unless you get them government inspected. And that means, by the way, that's not a man coming in the door and wanting to look at your eggs. You have to build him a building that's sterile. And he can come in and have a shower and put on his lovely, lovely white suit and his rubber boots, white rubber boots, and go and inspect your eggs. Well, of course you cannot. It's not meant that you can comply. It's meant that it's impossible for you to comply. You just go under until you have nothing left but the big those huge farm monstrosities they have for the chickens where they can't move more than a foot, This is the agenda. This is all deliberate. It's not by accident. The bee people across Canada, same thing happened with them too. They have to build a building, same idea, hot water and disinfectant trough that the guy walks through after he's showered and put on his gear, so they can look at your honey. Then you have to buy the spinner to get the honey out of the combs. That's got to be made out of stainless steel. Nothing else will do. All the old stuff cannot be used. And it'll cost you multi-thousands to buy that. And then you've got to be on the ball when he comes in and inspects you and so on. I mean, they're putting all the small guys out, and that's the bottom line. Same across the U.S. is happening. So whatever happens, this is what I saw back in the 70s even. I traveled an awful lot across the world. And I'd hear a law getting passed in Britain, and then I'd hear the same law getting passed in Norway a week later, then in Denmark, then in Germany, and then you go across to Australia. And then I realized that each law was coming out in your regular news, and you would say, well, that's our news. It's only you never even think it's happening elsewhere. And that's the trick too that they use. They don't tell you these are global laws we're passing. They've been doing this since at least the 70s and probably before. Yeah.
Because I was talking to somebody today, and the farmers around here, they're growing wheat and potatoes, as I said, and they've left maybe 4 meters around each field just to grow wild, to grow the wild flowers and stuff to attract the bees. But I could probably count on both hands the amount of bees I've seen this summer. I've not seen one wasp anywhere at all. And going back to the honey, the European Union, I was in Eastern Europe, and I got 25 kilos of honey, and I brought it back. But the legislation is you're only allowed to bring 1 kilo for your own use. And I was speaking to the guys who they produce honey in the back garden, and the guy says to me, I can give you as much as you want, but I can't give you any paperwork. And I says, why not? And he says, because I've got to sell it to this guy down here who's a mafia guy, because they've got all the quotas, and the European Union gave them all the quotas. Yeah. And they have to sell it to them at a certain price, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So, there is this myth that the European Union was all about competition and the free trade, and I mean, it's just put shackles on the farmers and, the beekeepers and anybody trying to produce anything, and trade it on an equal basis. There is no level playing field for these guys. And the same goes for like small business. We have the business rates and all the rest of it just going sky high, and all the legislation. I mean, I was in a small cafe in Ireland, and it was the same thing there. They said you have to put stainless steel in, blah blah blah. Until I complained about it, and I refused to do it, and they went away. I mean, when you stand up to them, they don't bother you that much, but people just comply. They just go along with it all. It's incredible, and they wonder how they go out of business.
Yeah, they expect you to adapt and adapt and adapt. And because it's a little bit here and a little bit there, most folk actually do subconsciously. They don't reason through it. They just adapt into it. Hoping, we live in hope. We hope things will get better, or we'll hope that the guys at the top will realize that what they're causing with all this legislation is making it hard for us. We still think, most folks still think that they're decent people at the top, and they've just made a mistake, and they'll fix it when they see it's not working. No, this is a very clever agenda, and they know exactly what they're doing at the top. Yeah. You see, this world of interdependence, Maggie Thatcher went on and on and on about. And interdependence literally means that not only do you have no nation state anymore, it means that you have no independence. Interdependence means you will be dependent for everything you need to survive. Food, shelter, water, clothing, heat. You will be dependent for everything you need to survive and live on this system. And that's what it means. That's what interdependence means. That's why they're cracking down on folk in the States who are growing vegetables in their garden in the States, basically. That they're saying you can't do that. You can grow flowers, you can grow dandelions, but you can't grow vegetables. You must be dependent on the system. It's power, and they're going after the most basic things of life.
Yeah, there was a case here recently. I think you might have actually linked it up on your site of the couple down in Dover. I think it was who'd bought the 4 acres. I think it was, and they planted the vegetables. They had their own well. They had their own source of power. And of course, the Agenda 21, they couldn't be allowed to do that. I mean, that's an example to everybody of how it can be done. So we can't have the public realising they don't need us. So we had to throw them off the land, put them in council house, and put them on benefits.
Yes.
So I mean, the whole, if you want to go green, and these people wanted to go green, I'm sure they were into that whole ideology without actually realising what it was.
And the thing is, next year, 2012, is the next part of the big hammer, because the first lot came from the Earth Summit meeting in 1992. So next year is the big one. Maurice Strong, the Rockefellers, as they redesign the whole system and bring part 2 along, which will be completely totalitarian. The first part was it gave all the rights to animals and insects and none to people. None to people. You have no rights in it. And the part 2 is coming along, where they're going after the water, and out of that will come the redistribution of the world's food supply through the United Nations. That's what they've already mentioned that. So your tax money is being thrown across the planet. Your food now will get thrown across the planet, and it doesn't look good. And we've got to stop all this nonsense. As far as I'm concerned, if they keep claiming with all that we're just another animal, then I want the same rights as an animal. I don't see a rabbit here getting told to get off the land. You don't eat that lettuce there. I don't see any animal being told, oh no, you can't sit here and do that, or even poop in your own garden. I mean, they poop anywhere. But the fact is, you see, we have no rights at all. We are so legislated into the ground that we've got to start pushing off, as Brian says, these layers and layers and layers of bureaucracies and government officials that are involved in every aspect of your life. That's what you got to do. You got to start regaining it again. And they're not going to be pleased, and they're not going to be let it go easily either. But we've got to do it. We're talking about survival here.
Absolutely. This is the key bit, talking about survival. And I've got to say that if I go back to my early days, when I saw only I knew only a fraction of what I know now, and I saw only a tiny part of the picture, but I knew that there was something very nasty on its way. And in a couple of my early talks, and I'm going to say, misguided enough at that stage to be involved with UKIP in its early days, because I believe that that party was actually trying to challenge Europe, which I'm now convinced it's not under the leadership of Mr. Farage. But I started to tell the truth about what I knew. And I remember one talk that I gave, and a man at the back said to me, Brian, you've described all of this stuff. What do these people want to do? And the answer I gave was, they want to kill us. And there was this stunning silence in the room. And then a couple of people said to me, do you really mean that? And I said, I mean it absolutely. And from that moment on, not only did the conversation in the room change, so it lost its sort of flippant, casual attitude and it started to become serious, but it taught me something, and I kept going with giving people information and using the right words. Because one of the worst things that's been done to us is political correctness, which is incredibly dangerous. It's not nonsense, which some people talk about. Political correctness is control of our language, and if our language is controlled, the way we think is controlled. And it is amazing what has started to happen now that people are actually using the right language in relation to what we're fighting. So we're finally beginning, for example, to hear members of Parliament and judges described as criminal. We are hearing people freely talking about Blair or Brown or Cameron being war criminals. It's just they need to be brought in front of the courts. So the moment we use the right language, we're doing something very powerful to regain our territory. And if we come back to the farmer with the chickens, initially for that man, what he came up against to him was red tape. and he would have regarded it as nonsense, but it was causing him problems and he found it difficult to fight it. If he was told that actually what was being conducted was a campaign to actually stop him eating permanently, it starts to focus the mind. And I think that we, in the broadest sense, and that's everybody that's out there doing something, one of the things they must do is start using the real language. These people, what do they want to do? They want to kill us. It's all in the documentation. If you choose the basic bit of reducing world population to 500 million, that means there's a big problem for most of us. But I think one phrase really captures what they're trying to do, and that is reduce the carbon footprint. Because it was Mike Robinson from UK Column who said to me quietly one day, he said, "Do you know, Brian, I think that the carbon footprint is us, is mankind." And I think this is absolutely what it is. We are carbon. We breathe it, we produce it. And now we've got somebody saying...
We're carbon-based life forms, you're right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we've now got somebody saying we want to get rid of the carbon footprint. They're saying that actually they want to murder us. That's the correct word. And I consistently find with audiences that if you use the right language, you might get somebody who scoffs and walks out, but the rest of them start to pay attention to what you're talking about. They may be quiet because you've actually got them a bit frightened, but we need to do this with some people to get them motivated. But I want to ask you a question, if I may, and that's, we're talking about these people. Who do you think the real problem people are? Who are they? And what do you think motivates them? Why have they got a different agenda to the one that a normal person would have?
That's well, we know basically by the ones who come forward, at least in the limelight of the public across the world, that they go, that number one, they start off incredibly rich. They've already got wealth. They are old families. They all have backgrounds in their families of high economics and very often dealing with national or international money lending, not just little banks on the corner, but literally lending to nations and doing the books of nations. In other words, they own the nation via their private banks, their private lenders. We know that about them. We also know that many of their relatives actually, using different names, are put into top positions of power in politics. Very good at changing their names. Have a look at Cameron's ancestry. It's interesting. And they all also belong to the same organizations, as I say. It's either the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or it's a Council on Foreign Relations, or the European Council on Foreign Relations, or the Institute for Pacific Relations is the other branch for the Far East. Which was started up in the early 20th century, that part. And the purpose to integrate the Far East by this organization. And again, it quickly documents all that stuff. But the thing is, getting back to political correctness and what you can say and what you cannot say. Now, you got to look into the Frankfurt School to understand who was behind it. The Frankfurt School was a university they set up in Germany. It's appeared, and people get very confused with this term communism, because it's been so diagnosed in so many places. It's got many fronts as well. Even the people who are ardent followers of it on the low levels have no idea of what it really, really is. But the Frankfurt School was set up. They ran out of Germany when Hitler came in, and they went to the United States and Britain. And these guys were specialists using psychology, which tells me again the depth of national and people's psychology that they understood. It was way beyond Freudian terms. This is very old science, obviously. But their job was to examine the cultures of each nation and simply adjust the perception of each nation to accept this same agenda of globalism, with an elite, an intellectual elite running the whole show and getting the public to accept it. And they would do that by looking at each culture and then taking over the culture industry within each nation. And this is all documented stuff if you look up Frankfurt School. And a slightly different one for the US. Britain, again, a slightly different one for them. And they ran the BBC, by the way. They still do. And at one time you couldn't get into the BBC for a job on any position unless you came from Eton. And in the 1960s, the Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations from the States and all the other branches from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India even, met in London. It was mainstream. And they were talking about bringing in a global culture in about 1964. And that's what the meeting was all about. And their big problem was, would they use Britain to spearhead the cultural change? Or would they use the United States and Hollywood and their massive programs? It took them 2 weeks to decide they would use American culture, which was their culture, by the way. It's not American at all. Everything in America has been given by the same Bernard-type characters that worked with these institutions and the Frankfurt School. Now, Theo Adorno was one of the biggest players. Very interesting man, an utter contemptuous elitist, because he actually said that very few people would have the intellect to understand his writings in his own book. You know, he took over the culture industry mainly for Britain. He financed a lot of the groups that broke through in the 60s to the top. He also was pretty well a genius in music. That was a sideline of his. Great friend of the Queen. Friendly with the London Philharmonic Orchestra. And he did definitely write a lot of the stuff for the top groups in Britain as they came out with the raging 60s and the sexual liberation and all that stuff. Just do it in the road like the Beatles song, all that stuff. And the drugs came in at the same time. So much sacks of drugs were thrown over university walls for free by limos just passing by, you know, get the whole thing kicked off. Every culture has had its head spun around by the culture industry. Now, Theo Adorno says we must degrade each culture, degrade them, until they have no past to look back on. It says we must degrade them and down to all the sexual immorality we can cause. It says including we'll know when we've achieved our goal when we get necrophilia as the norm. So here you have a bunch of people who worked with another group called the Macy Group. Bertrand Russell was part of both of them, and a lot of other big players. Lord Bertrand Russell, who would use a form of socialism to guide this through. And you would understand what they mean by socialism. Socialism to them is the scientific domination of all society to reshape the world, to remake all that was left imperfect and make it perfect. That's what they say at their meetings. And they're talking about us. We're a natural elite. They claim they're the natural elite and intelligentsia should rule our lives in a proper function. It's just too scattered right now. It's just all dysfunctional. In other words, totally controlled society is what they mean by correcting society. Now, the Macy Group that worked with the Frankfurt School was given, again, they all fled out of Germany again, just before Hitler came in, met in New York, and Russell came over, Adorno and all the rest of them. And their job again was how to completely radically alter all that was held to be dear in the Americans' lives. That was independence, personal independence especially. And how they could wear them down bit by bit and again degrade the culture through all kinds of sexual immorality until standard fare of entertainment would be perversion. We have that. We've lived through that. It's here. And how they would gradually show that the state, through movies and all the rest of it, the state was in charge. Now you don't get the lone cowboy riding in town cleaning it up. Now you get the SWAT teams and CSI, and you get the FBI and counter-terrorism squads and lots of faceless guys in black outfits like Star Wars. That's how they've changed it until everyone's obedient to the system and afraid of that system. And the Macy Group was given authority to exist in perpetuity and to change the culture of America by President Truman. This is in their own records, if you look them up. This is in their own records. We think, see, the average person, you're born into it. You'll say, well, why would you have and I realized this when I was only 7, because I used to listen to the Moscow radio, and it had a Department of Culture that would come out and announce itself, the Department of Culture. Then I looked into Britain and it said British Department of Culture. Canada, Canadian Department of Culture. I thought, why would your government have a Department of Culture if you, people, collectively are the culture? It was set up to change the culture. And the Department of Culture decides what you're going to see on television and how they're going to grade you through it. The Department of Culture is where you get all your political correctness from. They hire authors by the thousands. I think every author in Canada gets a grant from the Department of Culture. Now, the only way you can get the grant, and I've seen the forms for it here, even music as well, it says you must aim to radically alter the culture in order to qualify for this government grant. Then they give you a list of things either to sing about, or if you're a novelist, to write about and insert in your writings. Or if you're a cartoonist, in the cartoons. That's why you got cartoons complaining that the older folk destroyed society by consuming too much. You're all getting paid to do that by your governments.
Whatever. Is that okay? Hello?
Hello?
Hello. We're just going to have a bit of music now, I think. And we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Okay, cheers.
Join SovereignIndependence.com radio on ICRadioNetwork.com every Monday at 7 p.m. UK time. Breaking the truth.
Welcome back to Southern Independent Radio. We still have Alan Watt on the line from Cutting Through the Matrix, and I think Brian Gerrish is still there from the UK column. Just a quick reminder that we're actually going to be running overtime tonight because we have Tony Farrell, the ex-police intelligence analyst, who was sacked for publicly stating that he thought 7/7, 9/11 were all orchestrated by elements of their respective governments. So he'll be on it at about 9 o'clock. We're talking to Alan during the break there about a number of issues. One of them was the health service. Another one was how, as mentioned earlier, we have the internet, but there's so much on there and things put specifically in there to distract and lead you off into all sorts of weird and wacky directions to basically divert you from what you really should be looking at, and that's provable facts on a number of issues really, and we really should be focused on those. The other thing we were going to hit on briefly was the element of Satanism that's involved in this whole agenda by these creeps, I think that's the only word for them, at the top, who whether the general public believe in Satanism or any other form of ism, whatever, these guys do, and they act out their fantasies or personal indulgences, whatever you want to call them, perversions, as and when they see fit. So I was talking to Alan there about the donor card system in Britain, because I was talking to somebody the other day there who had one and thought it was a great thing, and I was pointing out to them that if they were lying on the bed next to somebody who needed the same operation as them, and Alan mentioned that the doctor may be looking at the guy with the donor card and saying, well, you know, his kidneys are good, they'll be worth a few bob, his liver's good, they'll be worth a few quid as well. So we'll treat this other guy and we'll just harvest these organs from this other person because they've got a donor card and they've agreed to give us their body, basically. The health service in Britain and in Ireland as well are a complete disaster, Alan. I'm sure you've heard, and you know, there's people dying on trolleys and corridors and all sorts of horrors. I don't know what it's like in Canada. Is it similar or worse maybe?
Oh yeah, they're slashing it here. I mean, and then outside the major cities, here's a key too. Back in the 1980s, both in Britain and Canada, across the whole, what they call the Commonwealth, they started at the same time cutting out and closing down all the old rural hospitals. Because they knew the agenda, we won't need these folk in the future because no one will live in the rural areas. This is how far ahead they plan. And sure enough, to close them all down. Now, where I am here in Sudbury, you got walk-in clinics where you might spend the whole day sitting with a card like a cow with a number. It's not stuck in your ear, but it could be. And then you wait for them to call your name. You'll see a doctor who won't sit down. You can't sit down either, generally. They just want you to stand there with a prescription and say, what do you want? And you're out the door. And that's it. It's just one after, but 10 seconds per person. That's how much you see them for. They don't know who you are. They don't know your history, family history, nothing. And they don't care to know either. It's a rock bottom. And of course the cancer waiting lists here is sky high. And basically you can't get ordinary operations. Up until recently, by the way, if you wanted to change your sex, that was okay. That was done very quickly on the health service. But you couldn't get in if you had something vital, some vital operation. You had to go on the waiting list. And maybe wait 6 months to a year or 2 years, you know. So they're slashing it back here. But Britain is a flagship for every new introduction that society will accept. If they'll accept it in Britain, they'll accept it anywhere. That's what I've noticed. And so we always get what you put the introduced there after it's worked for them. And that's always been the way of it. Britain is definitely the flagship. And it surprised me initially too, many years ago when I saw the British people just accepting one hammer blow after another. I thought, what's happened to these people? Something's happened to them. Because it's not like that in their history and their culture, their heritage, just to take it and take it. So I think we've all been dumbed down, no doubt educational-wise, and no doubt through the food as well. But to be honest with you, when you went to Bertrand Russell, member of the Macy Group, the Frankfurt School, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, he went to all their scientific meetings. He also said by use of laws and food, meaning altering the food, and the injections, he says, we shall get the desired population very docile and obedient. So they've been doing it. I have no doubt they've been doing it. There's too much evidence out there to do with the polio vaccine, for example. Dr. Salk, who came up with the polio vaccine in the 50s, was a member of the British and American Eugenics Society. He was the highest member. And every paper that he wrote up until that vaccine, every paper was about the need to drastically and quickly reduce the population of these countries, Britain, America, and every other country. And suddenly he turns around with a vaccine to help you fight polio. Now, to be honest with you, you go into the history of polio, and it was hyped up through that time, Path News. Very few folk had television. And they kept showing you, just like the mad cow disease with the same one cow walking across the barn the yards, they kept showing you the one little boy in an iron lung, and everyone was horrified. It is polio. And they all rushed to get it. Afterwards, you didn't get polio. They just named it encephalitis and meningitis. You know, it's still there. So what did they really inject into you? Well, it's out there even up on YouTube, the guys who worked with them. And a documentary where Salk himself says, yeah, we knew there was cancer viruses in this. And the simian 40 virus only has one function, and that's to cause cancer. This is from the horse's mouth. But he said that we thought that the benefits outweighed the risks. Meanwhile, that generation's all dead or dying of cancer. Now, these guys don't make these kind of mistakes, and especially when it comes from a guy who's the head of the Eugenics Society, who advocates drastic, rapid depopulation. So, you have that aspect. Now, getting back even earlier, you've got to understand that they created this idea. The fastest way to standardize a system, bureaucratic, education, financial, and so on, the fastest way is to introduce communism. And that's what Lenin's job was to do. All those countries went under the Soviet system, became standardized, and you go from one to the next, and regardless of basically the change in accent or or vocabulary or whatever. It was the same system. And now they are the same system. Now they're fit to be democratic, as they call it. Join the rest of us poor suckers. But Lenin said, initially, he said, in the West, we shall set up services. Now we forget that your police service is a service. A service, you can either say, I want that or I don't want that. And at one time, towns would kick out their cops if they found out they were crooked or whatever. So that was a service. The health service was something you could either use or walk away from. They had no authority. But Lenin said that these services will eventually become the authorities over the people. And now you've got children's aid and all the rest of it, snatching children, blah, 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 all that stuff. You can't get into school without your shots. It's all used. So they're all authorities now, you understand. These are the real reasons that things are introduced, never to help the people. There's only one agenda here, and it's a totalitarian agenda. And when we go into the guys at the top, there's so many instances of the utter perversions at the top. Because remember, it's like Aleister Crowley said, he says, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. At that level, they believe they could do whatever they want. They're above any law. Technically, they are as well. And actually, factually, they are above any law. We've had so many guys in the House of Lords with their perversions in the mainstream, for goodness sake. I won't even go into it, but the fact is they get off with it. Because at that level, whatever religion they have is do what thou wilt. You don't have to believe in a deity. Some of them will actually say they believe in the Lord of the world. And they can take that two ways. They could be an utter atheist and say it. They believe in whatever force gives you the right to be rich and powerful and an overlord, basically, over others. Some of them are more into an actual real religious meaning of it. The Lord of the world is Satan, because it's from Saturday, right? Satan, of course. But, and so you have the two ways you can take it. That's why there's both atheists and a smaller selection of dedicated believers in it who believe that law is a religion. You understand? Law is the religion. Everything is done through law. And even when they're doing something terrible to the public, they'll make the law to allow themselves to do it. They'll always make the law to allow themselves to do it. So one way or another, they're utterly legalistic. They tend even to tell you what they're going to do next. It's just that the people don't really want to believe it, or they can't believe it. Nobody would do that. Well, they do. And then you're left with, at the end, flattened once again by these people. But yeah, they're absolutely legal. That's a train going by the way. That's the coast to coast Pacific Railroad going past with all the Chinese goods coming into Canada. But anyway, at that level, as I say, they're absolutely devout followers. And when you see some of them, I mean, like Madeleine Albright is a great example. I mean, McCarthy was right. He said the first place they must take over is the State Department, which they had long before he realized that. And then she, of course, was in the State Department for a while at the head of it. She's the one who quite happily said on television that when she said, well, you've already killed about 500,000 women and children here by starvation through embargoes. Is it worth it? It's actually over 1 million, But she was asked, do you think it was worth it? And she said, with no expression at all, no hesitation, she says, absolutely. She's not talking about people, you understand. To her, those aren't people. The only people she's talking about that matter are the ones like her, herself. Very, very special people. And then I saw her on a great documentary on Yugoslavia when they worked out how they were going to plunder the country and give themselves the right to go and bomb it all. And doing the same damn thing to that country. And there she's up on the board of NATO right now. A private army, as far as I'm concerned. They're using it for private functions and purposes of plundering countries and giving it to their buddies. They're looting the countries. And we're watching it happen. These people have no conscience. they have some way of recognizing or believing that someone is the same as themselves. And they have absolute contempt, utter contempt for everyone else. You're not a being. Right down to the medical service where they're selling your body parts, for goodness. I knew this years ago this would come. And I spoke about it years ago. I said abortion, number one, is going back to the ancient so-called paganistic times. And it's been brought back under the guise of science. But when you're training a generation of women to kill their own offspring, you better be very afraid of what's going on here. Very afraid. Because you're talking about the end of who knows many thousands or millions of years of generations of you. that all becomes you in the end. And they've trained the women to think it's just like getting rid of a wart. That's the terms that they use here, When you see that, and that's not good enough there. No, they've got to sell the spinal cord off for about $5,000 to some university or some scientist to twiddle with. And then they'll sell the brain off somewhere else. Then they'll sell the rest off to the pharma companies so that they can culture their new bacteria and viruses on that they're going to inject into your body, which technically is a form of cannibalism. When you're eating each other, you don't have to use your mouth to consume another person. We don't even recognize what's happening because our perceptions are distorted. They tell us how to perceive things. You got to stand back and say, how should I perceive this? And you'll see it for what it actually is. So even once we're dead, for goodness sake, we're worth money to them. We are farmed. We're farmed. We're farm animals. And when they claim there's too many, they can't get profit from you, they cull you off. When they've got wars planned for a century, they build you up and tell you go ahead and breed. And they leave you alone. This is an old technique used down through many, many centuries. And we've got to understand. But the biggest thing of all is economics. Everyone relies on that currency no matter what it is. The fact is, as long as we all accept it, we build the machines, we build the tanks that they'll eventually turn loose on you in the streets. And we're all dependent on this currency. And yet every country has the right to mint and print its own currency and sell it to the banks. That's what the Bank of Canada did all through the Great Depression, right through the 30s, right through World War II. The Bank of Canada was a real bank. They printed its own money and coined its own mint, and they put it out into circulation. They sold it to the banks. That paid for the cost of it all. And the banks then mortgaged it out to the peoples and lent it to the peoples. The rest of it was used through building projects, roads and so on. But we were debt-free all through the Great Depression. And from Britain and all the other countries that all were under the private banking system, the borrowing from international boys, they all came to Canada to see how it was done. And of course that's when the big bankers says, we've got to change this system. And they certainly did over the years, and Trudeau was the last one that got in. And now we're like everyone else. We're up to our eyes in debt, borrowing from private bankers with compound. In fact, the Canadian dollar is actually printed in Germany now. So, money, this whole idea of money, this is their key. They have no power without it. They'd lose all their power without their currency in circulation. And, that's the key to it all. That has to be abolished, that system. Because look at the taxes that are raised in every single country. It's phenomenal. Now, no one can tell me you can't live within your means with that kind of tax coming in. But what they're doing with the tax money, they put it into research and development for private corporations, they're throwing it across the world for more corporations to build their factories somewhere else and exploit some other country. It's all going abroad or into pockets. And that's the bribe force as well. Everyone is born and you live with basic fears. One is fear of poverty. In this system, you have a fear of poverty. You have fear of getting sick and being unable to get attended to or having medical care. A whole bunch of fears come from this thing, but the main one is fear of poverty. So much so, they can create people who are addicted to accumulating money, even amongst the ordinary people. That's a perversion in itself. So we have a perverse system that creates perversion. but everyone will go to work for it. The cop that will bash you on the head or kill you will tell you, just like the Nazis or the communists did, I'm only doing my job. I was told to do it. It's all to do with this paycheck thing. It has to be stopped, and you will get nothing done until you're making your own currency for your own people, and a new system is hammered out. Nothing is going to change here.
Yeah, I think Guernsey has a system where they do that. They print their own currency and for infrastructure projects or something, and they tell the people they're going to raise the taxes to recoup that money, and then when it's recouped, they put the taxes down again, and that seems to work fairly well, you know. But nobody's looking at that and saying, well, here you go, this works, you know. But sticking with solutions, I suppose. We've only got a few minutes left. You said earlier, and it's absolutely true that these guys are not going to stop unless we make them stop. And Brian was alluding to the fact that, you know, the more exposure, the better. We'll out these people. And, you know, I think we can get at the people that are put up there as the leaders, like the Camerons and the Cleggs. And once they fall, we have to keep going and go for the next layer and the next layer, keep peeling the layers.
And you have to go into their histories. It's like the Miliband brothers. You got to find out who the Miliband brothers were. When one of them was over in Russia giving a talk on radio, his aunt phoned in and gave her whole family history on the air. And then their father was sent over to Britain to teach communism in university, you know. Communism meshes perfectly well with this monetary system and this agenda. That's why they like it. That's why they use it so much. Quick standardization of their system. So if they could look at the backgrounds of all the different people in power and find out who they really are here, because they do have certain things in common, and you've got to expose that. Getting back to political correctness, this is what comes into it. From critical theory is the theory that the Frankfurt School came out with for political correctness. How do we train the public? And what it means is you must institutionalize the terms in society like global warming, carbon taxes, anthropogenic global warming especially, stuff like that. And also the things that you don't want them to talk about. And it's so simple, critical theory. It means everything that is anti your agenda, you must attack it and criticize it. That's all it means. But that's also going all the way up now to different laws, so that you can't speak about certain people. I'm talking about individuals. Because they'll jump on a bandwagon and hide behind something, a good screen or something, and you can't go any further with them. We've got to go to the individuals and get their family histories, because you'll find that they're tied together, intermarried so tightly. I'm talking about these rich multi-trillionaires here. And literally, they've got relatives across the planet doing the same darn thing. And wherever they go, wherever they target, they bring the same system in of IMF for the United Nations, the World Bank, and the Bank for International Settlements, which is to be the big bank that Quigley talks about. They talked about this as early as 1920. They would do that. And we're living through that phase now. So, to be honest with you, as I say, money makes their world go around. They rule the money system and the finances, and now they pretty well own most of the resources now. That was another big part of their target, own all the resources of the world. Cecil Rhodes talked about that too. We've got to start taking back power and figure out how we're going to do it and what kind of system you're going to end up with as well. And even then, there's going to be factions starting fighting each other over what kind of system you bring in. You're not going to please everybody. But the thing is, until we all realize that we are being murdered, we're being set up to be starved to death as well. And never mind all the inoculations and more in the new inoculations they want you all to have annually all through your life now. Until we realize that and start getting moving and stop being so complacent and watching entertainment. Entertainment is the worst thing you can watch. You're being indoctrinated without even knowing it. So you've got to start reading serious stuff, because if you care about the people around you, if you care about your history, your as I say, all the people that went before you to make you, that's enough to stand up and do something about, because Because otherwise we're all going to be vanquished and it will disappear into history, and until the names are all gone, the people are gone, the countries are all gone, the heritages are all gone. That's what they've actually said that's what they want. Until there's no remnant left, a trace of what was before. John Dewey said it when he came from the Frankfurt School to set up the educational systems for the West. He said eventually a generation will be born where they're taught no history of a race, a people, a country, or conflicts, or anything else. He says they'll know exactly what we want them to know. And that's almost here today.
Well, somebody asked me just yesterday why I do what I do, because, you know, as you've said yourself, it's not a job, it's not a hobby, it's something that needs to be done. And I said simply that, well, I've got a son, I've got a granddaughter, and I care about them, and that's it. You know, I mean, if I don't do something, they're not going to be able to, or they won't be here at all. One of the two. And, you know, I think we all have to start, you know, looking at ourselves and what's important to us. I
tell people too, I says, you're no different from the ones at the top. They might say that they're special, they're better. They might say they deserve to rule you, but that's their opinion. You know, we're all born and we all come and we all go the same way. But no one can stand up and say, oh no, see, you're all rejects, you're all imperfect, and we don't need you anymore. You've fought all the wars for us, you've plundered the countries for us. Thank you very much. No. None of this getting back to the old caste system. It cannot happen. This is a caste system really you've got here. And it's got to be basically pushed out the roads until the people start really believing that every life that comes in to this existence here has as much right as to live its life in peace as well, and safety as anyone at the top. They have no right whatsoever to plan our individual lives, national lives, or the world's lives. And that's what they're sitting doing. That's what the United Nations is all about, in fact. And so we've got to stop, we've got to point out who they are, the fact they're all elitists, they believe they're superior, and that we are inferior. This is not India. This is not the Brahmin system. And who would want that? But that's what we're seeing, basically, them trying to introduce is a very similar thing to Brahmanism. It's a caste system. And no, it doesn't matter, as I say, who you happen to be, who you're born from. The fact is, you have as much right to live in peace and safety without worrying about what they're going to do to you next. And that's what folk do. What are they going to do next? They're talking about their governments. Nothing ever comes from government to help you anymore. It's always another fear thing that's going to rob and plunder you. This has all got to stop. Because we are, as Brian said, this is all about survival.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's life and death, and that's as simple as it gets. And I think we all have to start saying that little word called no, and enough is enough, and start fighting back in any way we can possible. I realise you have to get on and prepare for your own broadcast. So
yeah, I have to got a whole bunch of stuff to do today. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, thanks very much for your time. Very generous.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Thanks very much. We'll maybe get you on in a couple of months or 3 months and do it all
sure.
again.
Sure enough.
Brian, you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Yep.
Do you want a quick question for us, Alan goes, or just to say goodbye?
I think I'm just going to say goodbye. It's been brilliant listening to all the topics that you've covered, and you've covered a lot. So thank you very much for doing that. And I look forward to another meeting on the show.
Yes, it's been a pleasure to be on, and I did most of the talking here, but I'll have to, as I say, correspond you with a bit more as well, because, as I say, we're all in this together. We have no option. That's the bottom line. We have no option but to do what we're doing. Yeah.
And the more the merrier, I think.
Absolutely. It's all of us. We're all concerned here. Nobody can actually opt out.
Yeah, well, I was at I was at 3 mosques in Edinburgh, when I was still living up there, and I spoke to the imams of the mosques, and all 3 of them were in agreement with it that, we either stick together or we go down together, and, it's about time we all got together and sorted this out.
That's really it. We all go down together, absolutely. Because these guys have told us what their plans are. The public are so astonished they can't believe them. But we've got to start believing these characters, because they always do what they tell us. They're very legalistic.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much, Alan. And as I say, we'll get you back on again in a few months' time and do it all again.
Okay, you take care then.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye now.